Did you think war was all the thunder of victorious drums and the roar of heroes storming city walls? Welcome to the Assyrian camp, where glory smells of damp and heroism most often ends up on the casualty list that no one bothers to count. Here, no one dreams of feats, only of a piece of bread without mold. Here, every new dawn is just another chance to fall sick from boredom, drown in mud, or get punished for someone else's mistake. Your task is simple. Observe as the army prepares to storm a city that perhaps is already tired of waiting for its fate. Everything else is just details, where both grand conquests and small lives are lost and forgotten. Maybe, after this story, you'll fall asleep faster, or maybe you just won't want to wake up at all. But before you settle in, hit the like button under this video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'm really curious to see who's joined us. Now, get comfortable. We're starting. You wake up before sunrise because sleep is a luxury for those who are not in the Assyrian army. Your bed is a thin, dusty mat, barely softer than the earth beneath. There is a lingering smell of sweat and mold in your tent, a scent that after weeks of campaigning has somehow become familiar, almost comforting, if such a word can still be used in your present reality. As you crawl out, careful not to knock over the cooking pot that holds the last of yesterday's grain, you are greeted by the colorless gray of the early morning. The sun is just beginning its daily struggle to rise over the endless sea of tents. They stretch out, row after perfect row, like the world's dullest festival, if the main attraction was collective exhaustion. You pause. You have nowhere else to be. Nobody rushes in the Assyrian camp at dawn. Everyone has already resigned themselves to another day of marching, waiting, fighting, or dying, often in that exact order. You inhale, taste the faint bitterness of campfire smoke and cold ash, and listen. Somewhere, a child cries. It is unclear whether it belongs to a family of camp followers or if it is simply a soldier who has not yet learned to suffer in silence. Across the camp, the first few figures begin to stir. Most are soldiers, your comrades, if the word has any meaning among men who would trample each other for the last mouthful of bread. Their armor, once gleaming bronze and polished iron, is now battered, scratched, and in some cases more rust than metal. They stand and stretch, their movements slow and deliberate, as if the act of rising is a negotiation with fate. Behind them, the endless rows of tents seem to go on forever. If you were to walk from one end of the camp to the other, you might arrive only to find that more tents have appeared behind you, like a cruel magic trick. You are sure there are tens of thousands of you here, but no one has counted for certain. After all, who would want to know just how many lives are here to be lost? The camp is alive, but not with excitement. Instead, it hums with the muted resignation of thousands of men and women who have seen too much mud, blood, and boredom to care for anything else. Every step you take crunches against pebbles and dry grass. A nearby soldier, older than most, spits on the ground and mutters something in Akkadian that probably translates to another beautiful day in paradise. You make your way toward the edge of the camp, careful to avoid the waste pits and the area where the horses are kept. Both reek in a way that can only be described as legendary. Every day, the air is thick with the mingled aromas of too many people living in too small a space, too few baths, and far too much fear. Somewhere far ahead, beyond the camp, the city waits. Its silhouette is still faint against the horizon, but everyone knows it is there. It is the reason you are here, after all. The city's walls are said to be thick and tall, built to withstand anything. But as the saying goes in the army, no wall is so tall that an Assyrian ladder cannot reach its top, or so thick that an Assyrian ram cannot break it. A few officers pace the pathways, their armor a little shinier, their expressions a little more pinched. You avoid their gaze. To attract the attention of an officer is to be reminded that the only thing worse than being ignored in the army is being noticed. Breakfast, if it can be called that, is already being prepared somewhere. You catch a whiff of boiling millet, a taste that will forever be associated with the color gray. Some soldiers, those who have managed to hold on to a sense of humor, joke that the food is only served in shades of despair. And so the sun rises, indifferent to your suffering and your boredom, over a camp where every man and woman knows what awaits. Another day of preparation, anticipation, and eventually violence. But for now, in these quiet, smoky minutes before the full light of day, you are allowed to simply be a single, tired observer in the grand, tedious spectacle that is the Assyrian army. You wonder briefly what the city's defenders are doing at this very moment. Are they awake, watching you as you watch them? Or are they still asleep, dreaming of a dawn that will never bring war to their gates? Either way, the day has begun. You pull your threadbare cloak tighter, suppress a cough, and step forward. The first day of the siege has begun, and you are, regrettably, a part of it. You find, after only a few weeks, that life in the Assyrian military camp is less about the glory of conquest and more about waiting, endless, unromantic waiting, punctuated only by boredom, discomfort, and the occasional disaster. Victory is always somewhere in the future, just out of reach, while the present is a slow parade of trivial miseries and menial tasks. Your day, like every other, starts not with the trumpet's call to arms, but with the communal act of pretending to be awake before you actually are. The sun is barely up, and already men are wandering around, tripping over tent ropes, searching for missing sandals, or desperately seeking somewhere private enough to relieve themselves. Privacy, you quickly learn, is a myth in the camp. There are too many people and not enough space, and the smell, well, the smell ignores all boundaries, drifting freely everywhere, as democratic as death. You shuffle to the cook's tent, if it can be called a tent. It is really a sagging piece of cloth stretched over some poles, sheltering a few battered pots and the ugliest dog you have ever seen. The cook greets you with a grunt. His name is possibly Akkadian for disappointment, and his specialty is gruel of uncertain origin, seasoned mostly with sarcasm. Breakfast is served, a portion of something grayish, neither fully solid nor liquid. You eat it mechanically, as everyone else does, standing in a loose circle around the pot. Conversation is minimal. No one wants to accidentally inhale while chewing. Next come the morning chores. The most glamorous assignment, naturally, is latrine duty, which has its own special set of miseries. Armed with a broken stick and a hopeless attitude, you are sent to help manage the pit. That is, to poke at it, throw some dirt over it, and hope that whatever is bubbling down there stays there. The best you can say is that it builds character, or so the officers claim. Laundry is a similarly Sisyphean task. There are no rivers nearby, so water is precious. Uniforms are dunked into barrels, already full of other uniforms, swished around half-heartedly, and then hung on a line, still dirty, but now wet. You have given up hope of ever feeling truly clean. Your skin is a permanent shade of grime, and your fingernails contain a year's worth of history. The day proceeds with the men gathering to mend equipment. Shields are patched with leather strips. Spears are sharpened until they are more splinter than weapon, and sandals are sewn back together with bits of string and curses in several languages. You realize that an army spends as much time repairing itself as it does fighting. Some men try to personalize their gear, a scrap of painted cloth here, a carved symbol there. Mostly, the result is a camp full of the world's ugliest art gallery, with the notable difference that the artists are all sleep deprived and angry. At mid-morning, a group of soldiers begins the daily task of hauling water. The camp is ringed with buckets, amphorae, and skins, all of which seem to leak. You take your turn, joining a chain of men who pass heavy jars from hand to hand, each man certain that his jar is the heaviest. The well is guarded by a pair of surly officers whose job is to yell at anyone who tries to take more than their allotted share. You wonder if they ever run out of things to yell about, but experience tells you never. Throughout the camp, there is a constant background noise: boots crunching gravel, men shouting, horses whinnying, the distant thunk of hammers from the blacksmith's area. Over it all, the low, continuous drone of complaints, the music of 1,000 men who would all rather be somewhere else. Lunch, when it comes, is indistinguishable from breakfast, except colder. Some men gather to gamble with knucklebones, betting with the only currency that matters: promises and insults. You try not to get involved. Losing your only spare tunic over a bad roll is the kind of mistake you only make once. The afternoon brings drill practice, the closest thing to excitement the camp allows. Officers shout, soldiers march, someone inevitably falls down, and everyone else tries not to laugh too openly. Formations are practiced until the very idea of walking in a straight line fills you with existential dread. The only thing worse than the drills are the punishments for not doing them well. Between drills, you listen to the men talk. The topics are always the same: the city ahead, the last battle, rumors of new recruits, and the hopeless hope that the campaign will end soon. There are stories, some true, some wildly not, of home, lost loves, spectacular acts of cowardice, and the sheer stupidity of the officers. Evenings are worse. As the sun sets, the camp becomes a place of shadows and anxiety. Fires are forbidden near the tents, so most men cluster in the dark, wrapped in cloaks, muttering. You sense the dread rising with the night. Every rustle in the grass is an imagined enemy, every flicker in the distance a sign of doom. You have learned to ignore most of it, but fear is as contagious as disease. Before bed, there is one last roll call. The officer in charge shouts out names. Some get an answer, some get silence. You wonder where the missing ones have gone. Desertion is always punished harshly, but that never seems to stop those who have simply had enough. You crawl back into your tent, which now feels even smaller, even colder. Tomorrow will be the same as today, and the day after that, until the city finally falls, or you do. In the Assyrian camp, routine is the only thing you can count on. It is the dull heartbeat of an empire at war. Sleep comes slowly, dragging with it dreams of home, of food that is not gray, of days that do not begin and end in mud. You envy the few who can sleep soundly. For you, it is just another part of the routine, another form of waiting, waiting for something to change or for everything to end. There is a saying in the Assyrian camp: if you can hear the smiths, you are still alive. In truth, you can always hear them, morning, noon, and night, because nothing in this army is ever sharp enough, strong enough, or heavy enough for those in command. The blacksmiths and armorers occupy a special patch of ground near the camp's center, far enough from the officers' tents to avoid accusations of keeping everyone awake, but close enough that no one ever really gets any peace. You walk toward the smithy, guided by the clangor of metal on metal. It is not a harmonious sound, but a relentless pounding like the heartbeat of the camp itself, irregular, thunderous, and entirely devoid of subtlety. The smiths themselves are a breed apart, perpetually covered in soot and sweat, their muscles as knotted as old rope, and their tempers even shorter than the swords they hammer. You watch as one of them, a man named Tukulti, whose beard could shelter an entire family of birds, brings a glowing strip of iron down onto an anvil. The hammer falls, again and again, shaping the metal with the kind of determination usually reserved for those digging their own graves. Sparks leap into the air, briefly beautiful, before they vanish into the haze that hangs over the workshop. All around, other armorers are hard at work. Some are shaping spearheads, others riveting strips of bronze to battered shields, others still pouring molten metal into clay molds. The air is thick with smoke and the smell of burnt wool. In the corners, Boys too young to fight scurry about with buckets of water, always careful to avoid the flying embers and the occasional flying tool thrown by a smith too frustrated to care what or whom he hits. The tools themselves are as battered as the men who wield them. Hammers with cracked handles, tongs with missing teeth, files worn to useless nubs. The forge itself is ancient, its stones blackened and crumbling. The bellows wheeze like a dying animal, but they keep the fire going, feeding it with whatever scraps of charcoal the quartermaster has managed to scrounge from the latest supply train. Most days, the smiths barely have time to eat. There is always another sword to sharpen, another helmet to mend, another arrowhead to straighten. The officers complain endlessly about the quality of the equipment, never bothering to consider that perhaps it is not the smith's fault that the best iron has gone to the king's chariot, or that the raw hides for shield covers are often more holes than leather. You watch as Tukulti inspects his handiwork, a sword blade newly forged. He holds it up, eyes narrowed against the glare. It is, he declares, not terrible. In Smith language, this is the highest praise imaginable. The blade is passed to a waiting soldier, who accepts it with a grunt and a look that says he knows it will not last. Nothing does out here. Occasionally, a higher ranking officer arrives with a request for something special: a sword with a longer blade, a shield with a painted emblem, a helmet that might actually stop a blow. The smiths grumble but comply. The officer will leave, satisfied with his sense of authority, while the smiths mutter curses in languages that died out before the city you are besieging was even built. There is little sense of camaraderie here. The smiths are tolerated because they are necessary, but their skills are never celebrated. When a battle is won, no one cheers for the man who forged the spears. When a soldier dies, no one blames the shield that cracked under the weight of a falling stone. Glory is for those at the front. Sweat and burns are for those in the shadows behind the lines. Still, the smithy is one of the few places in camp where you can almost forget about the coming battle. There is a kind of order here, a logic to the rhythm of hammer and anvil that stands in stark contrast to the chaos everywhere else. The men who work here are masters of routine, if nothing else. Every tool has its place, though the places are usually dirty. Every task its pattern, every finished weapon a brief moment of satisfaction before it is swallowed by the greater machinery of war. As you stand in the doorway, one of the smiths glances up and gestures with his hammer. "You want to help?" he asks, knowing full well that you do not. You shake your head. He shrugs and returns to his work, striking sparks into the dim morning light. The hours pass. Another blade is shaped, another shield patched. Somewhere outside, a group of officers argue over tactics they barely understand. In the forge, though, there is only one argument: man versus metal, will versus inevitability. By midday, the smithy is as hot as a furnace and twice as unpleasant. The smiths' faces are streaked with grime and exhaustion. No one speaks unless they have to. Outside, the camp goes about its business, oblivious to the fact that its fate, at least for the next day, rests in the hands of best men who are already dreaming of a life spent far away from the sound of hammers. You leave the forge, ears ringing, eyes watering, and step back into the ceaseless noise and routine of the camp. Behind you, the hammering continues, never changing, never stopping. If you can hear the smiths, you remind yourself you are still alive, and so, for better or worse, is the Assyrian army. You would think, after so many days, weeks, perhaps even years, of the same routine, that the Assyrian army's morning drill would become second nature, slipping from one movement to the next with the grace and precision of a flock of birds. You would, of course, be wrong. The first thing you hear is not a trumpet, but an officer's voice, hoarse and irritated, bellowing at men who have heard it all before and who are by now experts in ignoring most things yelled in their direction. The drill yard is a patch of earth conveniently flat because nothing grows there, not grass, not hope, not even weeds. You and the rest of your cohort shuffle into formation, stepping over old divots and the occasional piece of discarded equipment. The air is thick with anticipation and also with the lingering smell of the latrine pits. A low murmur passes through the ranks, mostly complaints and poorly disguised insults aimed at the officers. Today, like every day, begins with the officers walking the line, scanning for anyone who looks particularly unkempt, ill, or, worst of all, too enthusiastic. They seem to have a radar for such things, and their favorite game is to single out a man for some minor infraction. A rusty buckle, a torn sandal, a look of insufficient terror. You keep your eyes forward, body rigid, mind drifting far from the reality in front of you. Shields up, comes the command, and a sea of battered, mismatched shields rises in unison, though never quite as fast as the officers would like. Formation. The line wobbles as men jostle for space, some eager to avoid the front, others eager only for the drill to end. You are reminded, as always, that an Assyrian army is not a single beast, but a restless, reluctant herd. The drill itself is monotonous. Raise your spear, lower your spear, march forward 3 paces, halt, turn, repeat. Sometimes the officers vary the commands just to keep you awake, but it rarely works. You notice that the man to your left, whose name you have never bothered to learn, counts under his breath as if reciting some desperate prayer. On your right, a grizzled veteran with one ear missing stares into the distance, unmoving, his mind probably somewhere far from this dreary patch of earth. As the drill continues, tempers fray. Officers grow red in the face, their shouting gradually devolving into inarticulate roars. The men respond by moving even slower, a silent form of rebellion that never fails to enrage those in charge. Every now and then, someone drops a shield or stumbles over their own feet, prompting a fresh round of beratement. No one laughs aloud. It is not wise to appear too cheerful, but you see more than one smirk quickly hidden behind a raised shield. There are, of course, always a few who take the whole business far too seriously: the ambitious, the terrified, the hopelessly naive. These are the ones who rush to the front, who shout the commands back with the force of desperation, who polish their helmets until they shine like beacons, albeit beacons of foolishness. The officers praise them for their discipline and example, which is precisely why you make a point never to stand too close to them. At intervals, the drill is interrupted by a new group of recruits, fresh from the villages and clearly bewildered by everything: the mud, the noise, the sheer scale of the camp. You watch as they are corralled into a separate line, given dull wooden swords, and subjected to a version of the drill that is equal parts instruction and humiliation. There is a perverse comfort in seeing someone even more miserable than yourself. The officers insist that all of this, every shout, every bruise, every aching muscle, is for your own good. A well drilled army, they say, is a living weapon. You suspect that the only thing truly alive in this army is the officer's love of shouting. Still, you comply, because the alternative is punishment, and the Assyrian army has a deep well of creative misery for those who disobey. You notice, not for the first time, that the drill is as much for show as for function. Out beyond the camp, the city's defenders surely watch, perhaps trembling at the spectacle of so many men moving more or less as one. Or perhaps they simply laugh, having endured their own version of this farce behind their walls. After what feels like an eternity, but is probably only the better part of an hour, the drill ends with a final, ragged command. Shields are lowered, spears grounded, and the men immediately begin to disperse, eager to vanish into the relative anonymity of the camp. The officers linger, discussing the failings of this or that cohort, their voices dripping with disappointment. You slip away, shoulders aching, mouth dry, mind already drifting toward the next meal, or, failing that, the next opportunity to sit down and do nothing at all. In the grand tapestry of conquest, this is the daily stitchwork, not glorious charges or heroic stands, but the dull repetition of orders, the slow grind of bodies against discipline, the never ending battle between fatigue and expectation. In the Assyrian army, greatness is measured not in victories, but in how well you manage to avoid attracting attention during drill. You return to your tent, or perhaps to the shade of a nearby wagon, feeling neither stronger nor more ready for war, but merely grateful that for now, no one expects you to march in a straight line. The sounds of the drill fade into the background noise of camp life: hammers in the smithy, muttered curses, the distant clatter of armor, familiar, comforting, oppressive. Tomorrow, it will all begin again. You learn quickly in the Assyrian army that fear is not limited to the common soldier. It moves through the officers' quarters just as readily as it flows through the muddy tents of the rank and file. The only difference is that officers are better at hiding it, usually behind polished armor, sharper words, and, when all else fails, the ability to send someone else to do their suffering for them. You do not often linger near the officers' tents for obvious reasons. Their world is fenced off by invisible lines of status and suspicion. Still, sometimes you are close enough, filling a water jar, running an errand for your sergeant, or simply lost in thought on your way to the cook's tent, to hear their voices carried on the breeze, sharp and tense, louder than they mean them to be. Their tents are bigger, but hardly more comfortable. The canvas is stretched taut, the floor sometimes covered with a carpet or a reed mat, but everything smells faintly of oil, sweat, and whatever passed for last night's supper. At a glance, it might seem orderly, scrolls and tablets stacked, armor displayed, shields arranged in impressive rows. But look closer, and you see the marks of nervous habit, a helmet endlessly polished, a dagger's edge tested over and over, fingers drumming on the pommel of a sword. The topics of conversation are as predictable as the camp's gruel, and every bit as unpalatable. First, there is the city, its walls, its defenders, its rumored supplies and water sources. Every officer has an opinion, usually based on secondhand rumor or childhood legend, but all delivered with absolute certainty. The more junior the officer, the more loudly he voices his strategy, as if volume could substitute for experience. You listen from a safe distance as one captain, his breastplate newly shined, his voice sharp enough to cut cloth, lays out his vision for the coming siege. He favors a direct assault, ladders, rams, and the full weight of the army against the city's main gate. Another, older, with a limp that tells stories his tongue will not, shakes his head and insists that patience is the only path. Let them starve. They will break before their walls do, he says, his words measured, eyes always flicking to the shadows, as if he expects an assassin in every tent corner. There is always the shadow of the king, distant but never absent. The officers speak of him in hushed tones, as though his name might summon him. His expectations are a burden heavier than any sword or shield. The king wants swift victory, one whispers, but he also wants the city intact. Try squaring that circle. Another, with the dark rings of sleeplessness under his eyes, mutters about the fate of those who fail Assyria's ruler. Demotion if you are lucky, exile if you are not, and for the truly unfortunate, death by some inventive, memorable method. When officers think no one is listening, their talk turns to the private fears that keep them awake. Will their superiors notice the shortages in their ranks? What if their last letter home is intercepted and read aloud at mess, a source of ridicule for months? Some speak of home in rare, wistful tones, of wives who may already have forgotten them, of sons they hope to see again. But such moments are fleeting, soon crushed under the weight of duty, ambition, and the unspoken knowledge that survival in the officer's world is a matter of sharp wits and sharper elbows. You note that officers are always watching each other, even as they pretend to be comrades. Promotion is possible, but only if another officer stumbles, hesitates, or, best of all, dies in a manner that can be plausibly blamed on someone else's error. There is a kind of hierarchy of dread. The higher up you go, the more your fear is scented with envy. Every officer seems to carry a ledger, not only of supplies and rations, but also of grudges, slights, and debts that must one day be repaid. Their daily rituals are a study in anxious pride. Inspections are conducted with exaggerated seriousness. Mistakes are corrected with public severity. Even the simplest decisions, a night patrol's route, a punishment for theft, an allocation of water, are weighed for their political impact. When officers argue, it is never just about tactics, but about position, reputation, and that most precious currency of all, the favor of those above. At times, you glimpse the officer's moments of private terror. One, alone in his tent at dusk, traces the lines of a scar on his arm, as if searching for courage in the old wound. Another sits for hours, staring at a chipped statue of a god, lips moving in silent, desperate prayer. A third is always seen writing, burning, and rewriting letters, none of which are ever sent. Yet ambition endures. You sense it in the way the youngest officers cling to every order, desperate to prove themselves. In the older ones, ambition curdles into bitterness, a reminder that survival means outlasting, not outshining your rivals. Every officer here is convinced that he is only one victory away from the king's notice, only one mistake away from disgrace. By nightfall, their fears retreat behind the facade of authority, but you know they never really go away. Tomorrow, they will don their helmets and stride about with practiced confidence. They will issue orders, reprimand the careless, and perform their little dramas for the benefit of all. But beneath the surface, the officers are as frightened, uncertain, and tired as any conscript, just better at pretending otherwise. You pass by their tents as darkness falls, listening to the faint, brittle laughter, the brittle boasts, the whispered prayers. In the Assyrian army, everyone is waiting for something: glory, disaster, relief, or revenge. The officers just have more to lose and more reasons to keep you from noticing. If there is a true marvel in the Assyrian army, greater even than the walls they topple or the terror they inspire, it is the endless train of supply wagons creaking slowly across the landscape. You wake some mornings convinced the camp is simply a vast, shifting warehouse, a kingdom of crates and barrels, sacks and bundles, with soldiers merely an afterthought, brought in to move things around and get in the way. It is impossible to walk anywhere without stumbling into a pile of something. Here, towers of amphorae, their contents more often guessed at than known. There, mountains of bread, stale before it is unloaded, coils of rope that never seem long enough, bundles of kindling already damp. At the edges, herds of animals, cows, goats, sheep, move in slow circles, not quite sure if they are part of the army or just waiting to be eaten. No one asks them. No one asks you either. The supply masters, a breed as irritable as they are indispensable, rule over this domain with a scowl and a tally stick. You watch as they oversee the unloading of a wagon, every item checked, double checked, and muttered about. They have a gift for finding faults: a jar chipped, a crate splintered, a cask of wine that has, by some divine intervention, already been half emptied. Accusations fly, mostly ignored, and a fresh round of accounting begins, with numbers scratched into clay tablets and then promptly miscounted. You are called, more often than you would like, to help with the supply trains. The task is as thankless as any in the army. Barrels of salt fish that leak brine onto your feet, sacks of barley dust that find their way into your hair, your nose, your dreams, heavy boxes that seem to grow heavier every time you lift them. At least, you console yourself. You have learned to distinguish the difference between a sack of onions and a sack of something that only claims to be onions. There are endless arguments about allocation. The officers want more wine. The soldiers want more bread. The cooks want anything except another barrel of dried beans. The quartermasters just want to keep their jobs, which means never quite giving anyone what they actually want. Every shortage is a potential mutiny, every surplus an opportunity for petty theft. You suspect that the true enemy of the Assyrian army is not hunger or thirst, but bureaucracy. You notice as you labor among the wagons that the camp is a study in contrasts. There is always too much of something: spoiled grain, bitter herbs, sour cheese, and never enough of what you actually need. Water is rationed like treasure, and rumors swirl about secret stashes hidden by clever hands. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, you hear someone prying open a crate, the quietest rebellion imaginable. At the heart of it all are the animals of burden, patient and long suffering. Oxen that plod through mud and dust with the same vacant resignation as the men who follow them. Donkeys that balk at nothing except, inexplicably, everything. Horses that are fussed over like children, fed the best oats, and resented by everyone else. The only creatures in the camp with more sores than the soldiers are the animals, and even they look as if they might desert if given half a chance. The supply lines are a source of constant worry for the officers. If a wagon is lost, overturned in a ditch, or stolen by thieves from the hills, it is a disaster out of all proportion to the event. Men are dispatched to guard the stores by night, and it is considered one of the worst duties in camp. You have done it twice, huddled in the dark, staring at barrels that look increasingly like pillows as the night drags on, trying not to doze off and earn a lashing. Yet, for all the vigilance, pilfering is an art form. A wheel of cheese vanishes here, a sheepskin there. Someone manages to spirit away a small amphora of wine, which reappears hours later at a secret dice game. Even the supply masters are not immune, though when caught, they tend to blame each other, or the gods, or the mice, or all three at once. Inventory is a ritual that repeats itself daily. At sunset, you watch as men tally up the day's losses and gains, always ending with the sense that something is missing, something does not add up. You suspect it never will. Supplies arrive from somewhere: Nimrud, Nineveh, the mysterious north, and are sent elsewhere until the only constant is confusion. If war is chaos, then supply is its accountant, scribbling furiously in the margins. You marvel sometimes at the sheer amount of preparation involved in destroying a city. The camp holds enough food, water, and weapons to support a small nation, yet it always feels on the edge of scarcity. The dream you hear is that when the city finally falls, you will loot its storerooms and, for a few glorious days, eat something that has not traveled for weeks in a barrel. You do not let yourself hope too much. Hope, like fresh fruit, spoils quickly here. Night falls on the supply yard. The fires flicker, the animals settle, and the supply masters retreat to their ledgers. Somewhere a soldier stirs a pot with something questionable floating in it, and you realize that for all the planning and storing, the end result is always the same. Another day survived, another meal endured, another promise that tomorrow's rations might be better. In the Assyrian army, supplies are both a lifeline and a curse, always present, never enough, and, like everything else, destined to run out in the end. If you ever doubted the ingenuity of the Assyrian mind, a day spent among the siege engineers will disabuse you of that notion. The engineering quarter is a sprawling mess of wood shavings, iron scraps, and a tangle of ropes so confusing that even the gods would struggle to unravel it. Here, you witness the transformation of forests and quarries into tools of destruction, the sacred ritual of turning trees and stones into towers, rams, and death. The siege machines are a special kind of spectacle, the stuff of camp legend and the nightmares of defenders everywhere. They come in all shapes and sizes: the infamous battering rams, capped with bronze heads, shaped like snarling beasts; the towering siege towers that loom over the plain like monuments to arrogance; the ladders, dozens and dozens of ladders, each one slightly too short, as if the gods themselves are playing a joke on your ambitions. You are drafted, as everyone is eventually, to haul timber from the supply yard to the engineer's domain. The logs are long, thick, heavy, demanding the labor of 10 men to move a single one a dozen paces. It is said that an Assyrian soldier's most finely honed skill is not swordplay, but lifting things no human should be asked to lift. Your back aches before you even begin. The engineers themselves are a curious breed. Not quite soldiers, not quite craftsmen, they bark orders in a language entirely their own, a blend of curses, numbers, and frantic gestures. Their hands are covered in pitch, their tunics stained with every possible hue of dirt. You watch as one of them, a man with a beard braided for convenience, not fashion, scrawls figures onto a clay tablet, muttering about angles, leverage, and last time's disaster. Constructing a siege machine is less a science than a war of attrition against physics and bad luck. For every tower that rises, two collapse, once spectacularly, nearly flattening an entire cohort of helpers. Every day brings a new problem: axles that split, wheels that shatter, ropes that fray at precisely the wrong moment. When a machine is finally completed, it stands lopsided, patched with bits of old shields and whatever the engineers could steal from the quartermasters. Nothing in the camp is safe from repurposing. If a cart breaks down, its wheels are claimed for a siege tower. If an officer's tent is left unattended, its ropes disappear, later reappearing in the mechanisms of a battering ram. The engineers maintain that every piece of equipment is essential, which is their way of saying, "I stole it, and you cannot have it back." There is a certain artistry to the chaos. Watching a siege tower rise, beam by creaking beam, each one hoisted by groaning men and shouted instructions, is almost enough to inspire awe, or at least respect for the stubbornness involved. The towers are covered in wet hides, dragged from unwilling oxen to protect against fire. Their interiors are a maze of ladders, platforms, and dark corners where soldiers will huddle, waiting for the signal to rush out into an even worse situation. You are assigned to help with the battering ram, a monstrosity of oak, its head a brutal wedge of metal salvaged from the ruins of some earlier conquest. The ram is suspended on chains, its movement guided by a dozen men on either side. You quickly discover that the task is mostly about avoiding crushed fingers and toes. The ram must be heavy enough to break a gate, but light enough that it can be pushed, a compromise that pleases no one, least of all your spine. The engineers, for all their quirks, are tireless. By lantern light, long after the rest of the camp has settled, you see them working still, driving pegs, binding beams, testing pulleys that groan under the strain. They talk of other sieges, greater machines, clever tricks. One brags of a tower that caught fire and still reached the walls. Another claims to have invented a new sort of catapult, one so powerful it once launched a dead horse clear over the city walls. Everyone laughs and then glances nervously at the half-assembled catapult lurking nearby. To outsiders, the process seems endless, but the machines do take shape. Slowly, a ragged forest of wood and iron rises on the plain before the city. Each day, the defenders on the walls watch with growing unease, counting the towers, measuring the rams, noting the position of every ladder. The city's fate is being built, plank by plank, out in the open where everyone can see. There is, inevitably, competition among the engineers. Each wants his machine to be the first to reach the walls, to break the gate, to earn a mention in the after action report that will circulate back in Nineveh, perhaps earning a reward or at least a reduction in the next round of blame. Their rivalry ensures that mistakes are frequent, tempers short, and the shouting never stops. For you, the work is as tiring as it is thankless. By sunset, your hands are raw, your muscles burning, and your mind numb from the endless cycle of lift, haul, stack, repeat. The siege engines, when finished, are both a promise and a threat, symbols of inevitable violence, standing ready for the moment when orders are given and war shifts from preparation to action. When you finally stagger back to your tent, you carry the scent of sawdust, sweat, and fear. The night falls, and the siege machines stand silent in the gloom, monstrous silhouettes on the edge of the firelight, waiting. You are almost grateful for the darkness. By dawn, there will be more work, more shouts, more broken axles. The machines do not care how you feel. They are patient. They know their purpose, even if you do not. The officers call it reconnaissance, as if the word could transform anxious creeping into a noble pursuit. You call it what it is, being sent to the edge of the world with a group of nervous men to stare at walls and hope no one notices you. In the Assyrian army, scouting is a reward for those who are expendable, but not quite expendable enough to send in the first wave of an assault. The city stands in the morning haze, stubborn and distant. It is an unremarkable cluster of stone and mud, its towers poking up like broken fingers, walls bristling with defenders who look from this distance like lazy beetles sunning themselves. You are told that these walls have never been breached. You suspect this is true only because Assyria has not yet gotten around to breaching them. The scouting party gathers at dawn, a motley collection of the unlucky and the unfortunate. Some try to look brave, most just try to look invisible. You exchange a few words, half encouragement, half insurance in case you never see each other again. Each carries a shield, not that it will matter if the city's archers decide to make an example of someone. You trudge through the scrub and dust, the camp shrinking behind you with every step. There is a peculiar silence, broken only by the distant clangor of the camp and the quiet muttering of the scouts. No one wants to attract attention. No one wants to be the first to find out just how far the defender's arrows can reach. The goal, supposedly, is to map the city's weak points. You are to note the thickness of the walls, the locations of towers, the number of visible sentries, the presence of water sources or hidden gates. It is a list that sounds simple in theory and impossible in practice. You do your best, squinting into the sunlight, making wild guesses about which parts of the wall look weakest and which parts are merely less filthy. There are moments of excitement, by which you mean terror. Once, a sentry on the wall shouts, and every member of your group dives into the grass with the coordination of startled sheep. You lie there, cheek pressed to the dirt, waiting for the arrows that never come. Eventually, someone risks a glance and declares the danger past, but the tension never really leaves. Closer to the city, you notice details that do not appear on any officer's maps. The base of the walls is littered with old stones and the bones of failed attacks, rusted swords, shattered ladders, even the occasional broken helmet half swallowed by weeds. You see the city's defenders watching you, some with idle amusement, others with the tired menace of men who have seen this dance before. Occasionally, a shouted insult floats down, translated quickly by someone in your group who claims to speak the local tongue, but probably just enjoys making things up. Some scouts argue about what they see. One insists a certain section of wall looks thin. See how it bows out there? Another swears there is a hidden postern gate behind a clump of thorny bushes. A third spends an hour sketching towers in the dust with a stick, convinced he has uncovered the secret to the city's defenses. You nod and pretend to agree. Everyone knows these arguments will be repeated, word for word, at the officers' briefing, where they will be ignored in favor of whatever plan was decided last week. You move carefully, never too close, always mindful that the city's walls are not just stone, but also eyes and arrows. Sometimes you catch glimpses of daily life, children peeking through battlements, women hauling water from hidden wells, stray dogs nosing for scraps. You try not to think too hard about them. Empathy is a dangerous luxury, best reserved for another life. The officers who accompany you, rarely risking their own skins, but eager to claim credit, take furious notes on wax tablets. You wonder how much will survive the return journey, how much will simply melt away, like most of the plans in this campaign. When they tire of pretending to be brave, they signal a return. You feel relief, though it is tinged with disappointment. You have survived this time, but you know you will be sent out again until luck or the enemy runs out. On the walk back, the conversation turns from speculation to bravado. Some men inflate the dangers they faced, others play down their fear. By the time you reach the edge of camp, the story has already become legend. You are almost surrounded. The defenders unleashed wild dogs. Arrows fell like rain. You recognize the comfort in these exaggerations. It is easier to laugh at invented danger than to dwell on the real kind that waits for you tomorrow. You deliver your report to an officer who listens with half an ear, already thinking ahead to the next meeting, the next set of contradictory instructions. He thanks you in the perfunctory manner of a man who has no idea whether your work matters and does not much care. Back in camp, you return to routine, bad food, worse rest, the knowledge that the city's walls have become more than a physical barrier. They are the edge of your world, a promise that danger is real and waiting. The others congratulate you on your survival. You try to smile. You know you will be sent out again, because in the Assyrian army, there is always another wall to stare at, another secret to uncover, another day to endure. In the Assyrian camp, the gods are never far away, though their company is rarely comforting. Their priests move among you like shadows, silent, inscrutable, their faces hidden behind veils of dust and ritual oil. Their presence is both a promise and a threat. The promise of divine favor if you obey, the threat of divine wrath if you do not. You never quite know which is which. The priest's tent is larger than most, ringed with stakes and strung with faded cloth bearing symbols you cannot read. Fires burn at its corners, smoky and foul smelling, filling the air with the scent of old blood and cheap incense. You are summoned there one dawn. No one asks if you want to go, no one ever does, and find yourself among a collection of officers, scribes, and the unlucky. All of you wear the same expression: wary, respectful, exhausted. Inside, the priests stand motionless, hands folded in their sleeves, eyes half closed in perpetual prayer or perpetual boredom. Their voices, when they do speak, seem to come from somewhere very far away, as if you are hearing not words, but the memory of words. They chant in languages that have not been spoken outside temple walls for centuries, their syllables winding around you like vines, sticky and inescapable. At the center of the tent is an altar, a slab of stone stained dark from 1,000 sacrifices. On it, a goat awaits its fate, chewing absently on the corner of a reed basket. The priests circle the animal, muttering, sprinkling water, anointing it with oil. You watch, caught between fascination and disgust. The officers pretend this is normal, but you can see the way their hands twitch, the way their eyes slide away from the altar. The sacrifice itself is over quickly. A slash, a spurt of blood, the goat's final shudder. The priests catch the blood in bronze bowls, letting it run over their hands, down their arms, onto the floor, where it pools and seeps into the dirt. You are told that this is for the gods, that the gods must be appeased, that a campaign begun without proper offerings is doomed before it starts. You do not believe it, but you do not dare say so. Faith is as much a weapon here as any sword. After the sacrifice, the priests study the entrails with the seriousness of surgeons. They poke and prod, mutter and frown, drawing meaning from patterns only they can see. A good omen, one declares, holding up a length of intestine as if it were a royal decree. A sign of trouble, another says, pointing to a discolored patch of liver. The officers nod, pretending to understand, but you know they hear only what they want to hear. You notice the rituals are never the same twice. Sometimes it is a goat, sometimes a sheep, once, on a particularly desperate day, a cage of pigeons. There are always candles, always prayers, always a sense that whatever is being asked for is more than the priests can deliver. Sometimes, in the darkness before dawn, you hear the priests singing to themselves, voices rising and falling in a cadence that is both beautiful and unnerving. The soldiers treat the priests with a mixture of fear and resentment. On the one hand, everyone knows that angering a priest is unwise. On the other, everyone suspects the priests are as mortal, as greedy, as fallible as anyone else. There are stories, never told within earshot, of priests accepting bribes to deliver favorable omens, of rituals adjusted to suit the ambitions of officers, of sacrifices staged for the benefit of morale rather than the gods. Yet, for all the suspicion, there is comfort in ritual. In a world of chaos, blood, and uncertainty, the slow, deliberate movements of the priests offer a kind of anchor. The firelight on their faces, the scent of incense, the rhythm of chanting, All of it conspires to create a moment of stillness in the churn of the siege. You find yourself lulled, if not convinced, by the spectacle. On days when morale is lowest, when the siege machines fail, or a scouting party does not return, the priests are busiest. They lead processions through the camp, sprinkling water, burning herbs, whispering blessings. Men reach out to touch their robes, hoping for protection, or at least luck. You see the same fear in every face, a desperate hope that the gods are listening, and a deeper fear that the gods, having listened, do not care. There are darker rituals too. Late at night, when most of the camp sleeps, you hear the distant sound of drums. Someone whispers that the priests are making offerings for the souls of the dead, or worse, for the souls of the living soon to die. You try not to think about it, but the thought clings to you like cold sweat. In the Assyrian army, you learn quickly that some questions are best left unasked. Eventually, you are dismissed. The priests offer you a handful of ashes to smear on your forehead, a gesture meant to bring favor. You comply, feeling foolish but grateful for any protection, real or imagined. As you step back into the harsh light of day, you realize the siege is not only a battle of swords and walls, but also a war of symbols, omens, and half understood prayers. In the end, you suspect, the outcome will be decided less by the gods than by the weariness of men. But for now, you are content to let the priests do their part and to hope quietly that it is enough. If there is one thing that binds the Assyrian soldiers together, it is not pride or discipline or even loyalty. It is fear, the kind that slips beneath your skin and settles there, a quiet companion through every waking hour. Some days, it is sharp and electric, dancing up your spine at the thought of arrows from the city walls or the sudden call for volunteers. More often, it is dull and heavy, like a stone tucked behind your heart. You learn quickly that in the siege camp, fear is as common as dust and nearly as impossible to get rid of. You hear it at night, most clearly. Darkness falls over the tents, and the fires burn low to avoid catching the eyes of enemy archers. The day's noise, the banging of hammers, the shouting of officers, the endless movement, gives way to a stillness that is anything but peaceful. From the shadows, you hear it, the faint whimpering of a boy too young to fight, but too old to run, the rasp of a man grinding his teeth, the soft sound of someone weeping into his cloak and pretending it is only a cough. No one speaks of it in the morning. By then, the rituals of camp life have resumed their grip. You rise with the others, shake the mud from your tunic, and pretend the night was just a bad dream. The soldiers gather in little knots around cold cookpots, trading stories, never about fear, always about food, or home, or the endless incompetence of the officers. Complaints are the camp's real currency, exchanged with the easy fluency of men who know they will never be listened to. You notice how quickly superstition takes root. Someone hangs a scrap of blue cloth over his tent entrance. He claims it wards off bad luck. Another carries a pebble in his boot swearing it was blessed by a priest. A third refuses to eat before sunrise, convinced that misfortune hunts the hungry. You smile at these little rituals, even as you invent a few of your own. You tell yourself you are not afraid, just cautious, just careful, just smart. The waiting is the worst. Days stretch out, featureless and slow, each one bleeding into the next. There is always the sense of something coming, just over the horizon, the attack, the order, the end of it all. Until then, you wait. You play dice with men who have nothing left to wager, carve notches in your spear, repair your sandals for the 100th time. The routines are a lifeline. You cling to them, not because they matter, but because they keep you from thinking too much. You see how men change. The bravest become reckless, volunteering for every dangerous job just to feel alive. The cowards grow quieter, smaller, fading into the background in hopes of being overlooked. Most fall somewhere in between, neither heroes nor deserters, just tired men doing what they must to get through another day. You find yourself envying those who seem untouched by fear, though you suspect it is only an act. The talk around the campfire is sometimes of home, but more often of the city ahead. How high are the walls, really? How deep the moat? How many defenders hide behind those stones? Everyone has heard a different rumor. Some say the city's king is a madman, others that he is a genius, or a coward, or already dead. The truth matters less than the talking. As long as you are speaking, you are not thinking. And as long as you are not thinking, fear cannot quite get its hands around your throat. Occasionally, you catch a glimpse of someone writing a letter, words scrawled by firelight, addressed to mothers, wives, children, or gods. Most of these letters will never leave the camp. Some will be burned, some buried, some simply abandoned when the final call comes. You wonder what you would say if you could find the words, if you believed anyone would ever read them. You remember the stories the veterans tell, always at night, always with a smile too wide to be real. They speak of past sieges, impossible odds, miraculous escapes. They speak of friends lost, promises made, battles won and forgotten. You learn to recognize the stories for what they are, attempts to convince themselves and you that survival is possible, that fear is only a story too. The worst moments come when the camp is quiet, when even the complaints have died away. The mourn. You are alone with your thoughts, and fear walks openly beside you. You think of the city, so close, so silent. You imagine the defenders are just as afraid as you are, staring out at your fires, wondering when the end will come. Maybe they tell their own stories, invent their own superstitions, dream their own dreams of survival. When dawn comes, you rise again, step into your boots, and join the silent parade of men heading nowhere in particular. You nod at the others, share a joke or a curse, and try not to remember the night. The siege continues, slow and merciless, grinding hope into dust. But you endure, you wait, And you discover, as everyone does, that fear is never the end. It is only another part of the day, another weight to carry, another lesson in survival. In the Assyrian army, you do not conquer fear, you learn to live with it, to fold it into your morning bread, to carry it with your shield, to sleep beside it in the darkness. Fear is the city's first defense and your own last companion, and in the end, it is the one thing no wall can keep out. If there is one subject that fills more mouths and minds in the Assyrian camp than food or fear, it is the city's walls. You soon learn that every soldier, every cook, every officer and camp follower has become a self appointed expert on masonry, mortar, and the physics of siegecraft. The walls rise on the horizon every morning like a bad omen, and by nightfall they have grown taller in your mind, thickening with each whispered tale. The official reports are straightforward. The walls are stone, high and thick, well patrolled, crowned with towers at regular intervals. There are rumors of underground tunnels, of secret sally ports, of cunning traps. The officers claim to have seen the blueprints, which is odd because the city was built before any of them were born, and the blueprints, if they ever existed, are almost certainly locked away in some scribe's dream. Still, the officers talk. They love to talk, and more than that, they love to be overheard. You listen, as you always do, on the edge of a group huddled around a sputtering fire. Tonight, the topic is a crack someone swears they saw in the west wall, a hairline fracture that could, with enough pressure, become an opening. It is nothing, says one, a trick of the light. I saw it too, says another, and I say if we put the ram there, the whole section will come down like a rotten tree. No one agrees, but everyone remembers. Tomorrow, that rumor will be repeated as fact. The veterans tell stories of other walls, other sieges. You never trust the stones, one says. They look strong, but a good wall is like a good liar. It's its weakness where you cannot see. Another claims he once saw a gate so cleverly disguised it took a week to find, though he neglects to mention that the gate in question turned out to be the city's sewer outlet. You hear talk of the defenders, their numbers, their mood, their cunning. Someone claims that the city's defenders have been seen repairing the walls at night, plugging gaps, setting traps for unwary attackers. Another insists that the defenders are too frightened to do anything but cower. Both theories are treated as gospel for an hour until a third voice, older, quieter, reminds everyone that the city has survived 3 sieges before and will not surrender without making the Assyrians pay dearly for every stone. Sometimes a scribe or an engineer is drawn into these conversations, and then the mood shifts. Suddenly, there are sketches in the dirt, calculations made with sticks and spit, estimates of wall thickness measured in the length of 3 men lying head to foot. The engineer always points out the most obvious approach: batter the gate, undermine the tower, bring up the siege engines. The soldiers nod, pretending to understand, and then return to debating which stones look weakest from a distance. The best stories, of course, are always secret, whispered after dark, long after the officers have gone to their tents. You sit with a few trusted comrades, men who have survived too much to believe everything they hear, and swap theories. Some say there is a hidden tunnel beneath the river, dug generations ago by slaves who were later entombed alive to keep the secret. Others speak of an ancient curse carved into the city's foundation stones, promising doom to any who breach its gates. There are rumors, too, of traitors inside the walls, ready to throw open the gates when the moment comes. Someone claims to have seen a flash of light, a secret signal from the tallest tower at midnight. Another swears he heard a voice calling out in broken Akkadian, promising riches to whoever leads the first assault. You wonder if any of it is true. The city's defenders are as invisible as ghosts, but their presence is felt in every stone, every shadow, every unexplained noise. The officers feed on these stories as much as the men do. You overhear a captain lecturing his cohort on the importance of psychological warfare, by which he means spreading just enough fear to keep the men alert, but not so much as to spark panic. The walls are strong, he says, but not invincible. No wall is. The speech is meant to inspire confidence, but you can see the worry in his eyes, the way he fingers the hilt of his sword, as if to remind himself that steel, at least, is reliable. The city's walls become more than just stone. They are a living thing, growing stronger with each day of the siege, fed by the hopes and fears of both besieged and besieger. You find yourself staring at them at odd hours, looking for signs, cracks, shifting shadows, anything to suggest that the end is near. You know others do the same. The camp is full of watchers and worriers, each convinced that they alone will spot the weakness that will bring victory. In the end, the secret conversations change nothing and everything. The walls remain, silent and implacable, their true strength known only to the men who built them and the gods who watch from above. Yet the stories serve their purpose. They fill the silence, bind the men together in a web of shared anxiety and hope, and give you something to do while waiting for the inevitable order to the walls. You go to sleep that night still thinking of the city, its secrets, its stones, its silent defiance. Somewhere in the darkness, a dog barks, and you wonder if it is a signal or just another creature waiting for the siege to end. In the Assyrian camp, all answers are temporary, all walls are eventually breached, and every rumor is just a stone thrown at the moon. If you had ever imagined the cuisine of an imperial army to be a grand affair, banquets, roasted meats, a feast worthy of a king, your time in the Assyrian siege camp would quickly disabuse you of such fantasies. The reality is less a celebration of abundance and more a grim competition between hunger and the limits of your stomach's endurance. Here, food is not a pleasure, but a test, one you suspect most men are failing with ever diminishing enthusiasm. The morning begins with the camp cook, a figure whose authority is matched only by his indifference to the suffering of others. His domain is a battered collection of pots, fires that smoke more than they burn, and an endless mountain of ingredients that no one recognizes and everyone dreads. The cook's greatest skill is the ability to stretch a handful of barley into a meal for 50 and, perhaps more importantly, to ignore the complaints that follow. Breakfast is a porridge that defies description. It is gray, sometimes with flecks of brown or green, sources unknown, better left uninvestigated. You take your bowl and eat quickly, as much to avoid the taste as to secure your share before it runs out. No one lingers over breakfast. The fastest eaters get the least time to consider what exactly they are consuming. Lunch is no improvement. The staple is flatbread, hard enough to use as a weapon and tasteless enough to have been baked in a previous century. Occasionally, a wedge of cheese appears, sour and suspiciously slick. Saltfish makes an occasional cameo, its flavor so powerful that it lingers on your tongue for days, haunting your dreams and conversations. Someone tries to liven up the meal with a pinch of herbs, but the attempt is met with suspicion. In the army, innovation is not always welcome, especially at the cookpot. Meat, when it appears, is a rare and momentous event. The source is often best left unexamined. A sheep that died of old age, a goat that limped one time too many, sometimes something that might have once been a bird. The cook roasts it over a smoky fire until it is equally tough and flavorless. The men gather around as if for a sacred ritual, each hoping for a piece with more meat than bone. You quickly learn not to be picky. Hunger makes connoisseurs of you all. Then there are the true delicacies, inventions born of desperation and bad luck. Soup made from whatever could not run, fly, or crawl away. Stew thickened with the last crumbs of grain, a few wilted greens, and, if fortune smiles, a scrap of dried meat found at the bottom of a pack. On rare occasions, a trader or enterprising thief brings a jar of honey or a clutch of figs, instantly transformed into currency more valuable than gold. The conversations at mealtime are always the same: complaints about the food, speculations about what might be in it, wild dreams of what you will eat when the city finally falls. Stories circulate of men who once tasted pomegranates, lamb cooked with garlic, the mysterious dish called stew with actual vegetables. These are treated with the reverence of myth. Some men claim to remember the taste of wine, though you suspect that after weeks of sour water, any liquid with color would do. The officers, naturally, fare better. Their tents are supplied with hoarded treats, dried dates, wine, even preserved meats, and every so often a smell drifts across the camp that makes you briefly reconsider your loyalty. You know better than to complain aloud. The last man who did so found himself promoted to the night watch at the latrine, a position from which no one returns unchanged. For all its misery, the food becomes a kind of glue among the men. You share not just meals, but stories, jokes, rumors of secret stashes, and the latest recipe for turning stale bread and despair into something resembling sustenance. Someone suggests boiling a boot, and for a moment, everyone laughs a little too hard, knowing that if the siege drags on, it may come to that. You watch as the cook's helpers scrape the bottom of the pot, collecting whatever remains for the next shift. Nothing is wasted, not a crumb, not a bone, not even the water used to rinse the bowls. There is talk that in other armies, food is thrown away. Here, the idea is as absurd as a wall that cannot be climbed or an order that can be questioned. At night, the dreams are always of food: plump fruits, fresh bread, meat roasted until the juices run. You wake up chewing air, the taste of hope almost as bitter as the reality waiting outside your tent. You line up for breakfast again, bowl in hand, mind already running through the possibilities. Perhaps today the porridge will taste different. Perhaps the bread will be soft. Perhaps, against all reason, a miracle will occur. But of course, it never does. In the Assyrian camp, cuisine is just another word for survival, and delicacies are defined by the simple fact that you are still alive to eat them. You take what you are given, chew slowly, and try not to think too hard about tomorrow's meal. The moment everyone dreads, and some secretly hope for, arrives as quietly as a rumor, the first exchange of arrows. It is not a grand battle, nor even a proper skirmish, just the beginning of real war, the moment when the city stops being a distant obstacle and starts shooting back. You have spent so many days watching the walls and talking about them that it feels almost like a change of weather, the sudden realization that you too can be seen. The day begins as always: gray porridge, the clatter of shields, muttered complaints. The siege machines creak in the distance, unfinished towers waiting for their moment. Then, somewhere near the forward pickets, there is a sharp cry, the kind that turns the heads of even the most exhausted men. You rise, bowl in hand, and join the flow of bodies moving, slowly, uncertainly, toward the outermost lines. The city's defenders, perhaps emboldened by a new commander or just growing bored, have begun firing. The first arrows are almost casual, lazy arcs falling well short of the trenches. They land with indifferent thuds in the dust, some sticking upright like the markers of a forgotten graveyard. The men laugh, a thin, nervous laughter that does not last. An officer shouts orders, mostly about keeping low, and suddenly you are all pressed behind crude barricades, baskets filled with dirt, shields jammed into the mud, anything to slow an arrow. The bravest, or the most foolish, take turns peering over the edge, eager to prove that they are unafraid, or at least unable to be hit. You do not volunteer. You have seen enough to know that arrows do not care about courage or reputation. The Assyrian reply is slow in coming. The archers, grim men with scars like maps, take their time, selecting their targets, measuring the wind. When they finally answer, it is with a hiss and a whisper, the sound of 100 arrows slicing the air. Some fall short, some vanish into the walls. A few are returned with curses and jeers. You watch as an arrow strikes the stones above a sentry's head, showering him with dust. The sentry shouts something obscene, answered by laughter from your side. Soon the air between the armies is alive with flight. The arrows do not come in great clouds, as the poets claim. Instead, they arrive singly in small clusters, each one a message. We are still here, we are watching, we can reach you. The men quickly learn the pattern: when to duck, when to run, when to risk a glance. The unlucky few who do not learn fast enough provide grim lessons for everyone else. There is a stretcher dragged past, a soldier moaning, a shaft buried deep in his thigh. There is nothing heroic about it, only pain, mud, and the long, slow shuffle to the healer's tent. As the day wears on, the exchanges grow sharper. The archers on both sides seem to find their range. You notice that the city's defenders have better cover, their heads barely visible above the parapet. The Assyrian archers crouch behind what they can, but the camp offers little shelter. Some men take to carrying their shields everywhere, even to the latrines, where accidents now come with the added risk of a shaft in the back. Between volleys, there are lulls, moments when you dare to stretch your legs or share a joke with your neighbor. Every noise, every bird's call, every gust of wind is examined for danger. You startle at the sound of an arrow clattering harmlessly nearby, your heart racing as if you have just escaped death. After a while, you stop flinching, or so you tell yourself. A rumor spreads of a soldier who caught an arrow in midair, but the men who claim to have seen it are the same ones who always win at dice. Another says the defenders are running low on arrows, a claim repeated so often it begins to sound true, even as shafts continue to thud into the earth. You know better than to hope. The city has held out before, and the walls seem just as strong as ever. By sunset, the ground between the lines is studded with arrows, as if the earth itself has grown bristles. The first day of real violence is over, the casualties surprisingly light. But you sense a change in the air. The camp is quieter, the laughter more brittle, the bravado fading into silence. Everyone understands now that the city is not just a rumor, not just a pile of stones. It is awake, aware, and every man here is a target. That night, as you settle into your tent, you hear the distant clatter of arrows being gathered, counted, readied for tomorrow. The healers work by firelight, muttering prayers over their wounded. Somewhere nearby, a soldier sharpens his blade with slow, deliberate strokes, the sound a reminder that there are worse things than arrows to come. Sleep, when it comes, is thin and restless. You dream of black wings, sharp and cold, falling silently through the dark. You wake to the sound of rain, or is it more arrows pattering against the tent? The siege goes on, and you are one day closer to the end, whenever and however it comes. You would think, in an army so large, that a single soldier could disappear into the crowd, his mistakes lost in the endless routine. You would be wrong. The Assyrian army is a machine built on discipline, oiled not with loyalty or love of country, but with fear and the regular public suffering of those who slip out of line. Here, punishment is more common than bread and just as blandly inevitable. It begins with the roll call. You stand in formation at dawn, shivering in the chill, dust coating your tongue, eyes heavy with sleep. The officers move down the line, sharp eyed, searching for the smallest infraction: a missing belt, a dirty spearhead, a sandal too worn. You know the rules, all of them, but there are always more, invented on the spot if needed. Sloppy shield strap, that is 2 lashes. Absent at muster, 3 days on water and barley husks. The numbers climb with each offense, and you see the fear growing in every set of shoulders. You have learned to keep your head down. You have also learned that nothing truly protects you, not friendship, not skill, not even luck. Sometimes it is simply your turn. The officers need their examples. Someone must suffer so the rest remember. The punishments themselves are a kind of performance staged for maximum effect. The whole cohort is gathered to watch. The condemned is brought forward, sometimes a thief, sometimes a brawler, sometimes a man who simply stumbled at the wrong moment. There are beatings on the back, on the soles of the feet, with sticks, with whips, with whatever is handy. The blows are methodical, impersonal. You try not to flinch as the flesh breaks, as blood darkens the ground. Other times, the punishments are more creative. The stocks are dragged out, a crude device of wood and rope, designed for maximum discomfort and public humiliation. A man might be left there for hours or a whole day, exposed to the laughter and insults of his fellows, the sharp eyes of the officers. Food and water are withheld, and the only company is the camp's flies. Some men are made to stand at attention for hours, helmet and shield held high, until their arms tremble and collapse. You see the effect everywhere. Men talk in whispers, if at all, when the officers are near. Tasks are performed with frantic care, every strap checked twice, every blade inspected in the faint hope that this day will be someone else's turn. There is no room for kindness. If you help a condemned man, you risk sharing his fate. Desertion is the gravest crime of all, and its punishment is as public as possible. Once, you watched a man caught trying to slip away at night. The next morning, he was paraded through camp, his hands bound, his head shaved. He was made to dig his own grave, while the officers recited his offenses: cowardice, betrayal, the abandonment of his brothers. When the speech ended, he was executed, and the men were made to stand and watch until the dirt was tamped flat. The lesson was not subtle. Other crimes, stealing rations, striking an officer, speaking against the king, are dealt with just as harshly. The punishments are designed to be memorable: a thief's hand burned, a liar's tongue scarred, a troublemaker sent to the most dangerous post. The army cannot afford weakness, and so it is stamped out with ruthless efficiency. You might expect such discipline to breed order, but often it has the opposite effect. Fear makes men cautious, yes, but it also makes them cruel. You see it in the way men turn on each other, eager to deflect blame, to offer up a scapegoat in place of themselves. A careless word can become a charge. An old grudge can become a death sentence. Trust is a luxury, traded away for another day of safety. The officers are not immune, though their mistakes are handled more quietly. A failed plan, a lost supply wagon, a miscounted casualty. These errors are debated behind closed tent flaps, away from the eyes of the army. Still, everyone knows that even captains and commanders are judged, and the stakes are higher. Demotion, exile, or in rare cases, a knife in the back on a dark night. In the Assyrian army, discipline is the only law, and its hand is heavy. Yet, despite everything, the machine grinds on. Men take their punishment and return to their duties, limping, bitter, silent. The work does not stop. The walls are still standing, the city still defiant, the siege still dragging toward its conclusion. You wonder sometimes how many men are broken by discipline before they ever face the enemy. You wonder, too, how many are made cruel enough to survive what comes next. At night, you remember the faces of those punished, some deserving, some unlucky, all changed. You remember the officers' voices, cold and sure, promising that this is for the good of the army. You tell yourself that tomorrow you will do better, be better, and hope that the gods are not listening, for they have a soldier's sense of humor. In the Assyrian army, discipline is the only certainty, and punishment the only mercy that is never mistaken for kindness. The siege, when it finally begins in earnest, is not what anyone expected. There is no wild charge, no thunder of drums, no heroic scaling of walls. Instead, there is waiting, days and nights that stretch into each other, blank and gray as the sky above. If war is meant to be a test of endurance, the first days of the siege are a lesson in tedium. It rains, of course. It always rains when you least want it. The skies open and turn the camp into a sea of mud, every step a struggle, every blanket a sponge. The water finds its way everywhere, under tents, into boots, down your neck as you sleep. Your world becomes a damp cocoon of misery, wrapped in the endless drumming of rain on canvas. The firewood, carefully gathered for weeks, dissolves into useless heaps of pulp. Smoke from half-dead campfires mixes with the mist, turning the air sour and heavy. Nothing happens. Or rather, everything that happens does so at the slowest possible pace. The siege towers, covered in sodden hides, lean slightly more each day, as if even they have lost interest in the war. The battering ram sits idle, its crew huddled beneath makeshift shelters, sharpening their complaints instead of their blades. Somewhere, the engineers argue over whose job it was to waterproof the catapults. You suspect no one wins that argument. The officers call meetings under dripping awnings, voices muffled by the patter of rain. They discuss supply lines, rotations, the mood of the men. No one is in a mood to fight. No one is in a mood for anything at all. Orders are given and quickly forgotten. The only certainty is that everything will be harder in the rain, climbing, running, even thinking. You envy the city's defenders, dry behind their walls, watching your camp sag and squelch in the mire. Food spoils faster now. Mold creeps across bread in hours, and barrels of grain begin to sprout strange white fuzz. The cook does what he can, burning the bread, boiling the rest, lacing every meal with the taste of wood smoke and despair. The rainwater is carefully gathered in pots and skins, but it always tastes of mud, and there is never enough to feel truly clean. Time itself slows. The hours are measured in the slow seep of water through seams, the endless wringing out of cloaks, the squelch of every footstep. Dice games are ruined by damp, and the fireside storytellers give up, their words drowned by the storm. You spend your days shifting from one puddle to another, trying to find a patch of ground that is less wet than the rest. You do not succeed. The boredom is total. You polish your shield, then polish it again. You count the arrows in your quiver, then count them backwards. You try to recall the face of someone you miss, only to find that the memory is growing as blurry as the camp. The only excitement comes when someone tries to steal dry kindling from the officer's tent, an act of desperation that ends with a thorough beating and an even greater scarcity of usable firewood. Sometimes you venture to the edge of camp and watch the city shrouded in rain. The defenders are just silhouettes behind their battlements, motionless, unmoved by your suffering. You wonder if they are faring any better, or if their own boredom is merely drier. Rumors circulate that the city's wells are running low, that the people inside are eating boiled leather, that their courage is faltering. You do not believe any of it, but the stories help to fill the gaps left by the relentless monotony. Nights are the worst. The cold settles in, wet and deep, and your only companions are the sound of dripping water and the ache in your bones. You lie awake, listening to the storm, waiting for sleep or for morning, whichever comes first. The darkness is total, except for the occasional flash of lightning that throws the camp into sharp, trembling relief. Every day is the same. You wake cold and damp, hoping for a change, dreading what change might bring. You go through the motions, drill, eat, complain, wait. The siege continues, but in slow motion, as if the rain itself has seeped into every plan, every hope, every memory of movement. And yet, somehow, the army holds together. No one deserts, not for lack of wanting, but because there is nowhere to run. The officers, soaked and shivering, are as miserable as the men. Even the animals look resigned, huddled in their pens, eyes dull and distant. Eventually, the rain will stop, the sun will return, and the siege will become something else, something more dangerous, perhaps, or at least less monotonous. For now, you endure. You share what dry scraps you have, swap rumors and curses, and wait for the moment when the mud gives way to blood. The first days of the siege are not marked by heroics or horror, but by the long gray misery of boredom and rain, a test of patience, a lesson in endurance, a reminder that in war, sometimes the greatest enemy is simply the weather. If you thought that war was decided on the battlefield, a day among the Assyrian military advisors will set you straight. Here, in the smoky shadows of the command tent, the real battle is fought, not with swords, but with words, diagrams, and the occasional sharp elbow. In this world, strategy is a game played with pebbles, sticks, and a complete disregard for what it feels like to freeze, starve, or bleed on muddy ground. The command tent is always crowded. Inside, the air is thick with incense, sweat, and ambition. Maps are unrolled on every surface, held down by everything from jugs of water to the general's dinner bowl. The advisors, each one more certain of his genius than the last, circle the maps like vultures, jabbing at cities and rivers, tracing imagined lines of attack. You are summoned rarely to stand quietly in the corner, serving as a witness, or perhaps as someone to blame later. There are two kinds of advisors: the veterans, whose scars have more stories than their tongues, and the theorists, whose hands have never known a sword's weight, but who speak of logistics as if they invented the word. Each has his own grand plan, and each plan is more ambitious and less practical than the last. The veterans favor directness. "We smash the gates," one says, slapping a fist into his palm for emphasis. "We roll up the rams, ladders, towers, let the men do what they do best." Another grunts in agreement, pointing out that the city has never faced a siege this large, that a show of force will break their spirits as surely as their stones. The theorists prefer subtlety. "Starve them out," they say, waving away concerns about food and morale. They cannot eat pride. One draws lines around the city, describing an encirclement so tight it would require twice the army and twice the food you actually have. Another proposes psychological warfare. Send messages over the walls, spread rumors, bribe the city's mercenaries to switch sides. Let them collapse from within, he says, as if treachery can be summoned with the same ease as a change in the weather. The general, to his credit, listens to all of it, his face a mask of polite misery. He asks questions about supplies, about water, about the possibility of a secret gate or a traitor. No answer satisfies him. In the end, he nods gravely, announces that all plans are being considered, and then, later, in the privacy of his tent, orders something entirely different. It is said that no two officers agree on what victory should look like. Some want the city destroyed, others want it preserved for plunder. Some fear the king's wrath if the siege takes too long. Others fear his wrath if it ends too quickly and without glory. The military advisors know this, and every grand plan is shaped as much by politics as by tactics. You watch as alliances form and dissolve, as advice is offered, ignored, and recycled in the next meeting under a different name. The greatest danger is not the enemy, but indecision. Orders change daily. Today, you are to build a new trench along the eastern approach. Tomorrow, you are told to abandon it in favor of a night raid on the northern wall. Men begin to joke bitterly that the only real strategy is confusion. If we do not know what we are doing, one says, how can the enemy possibly guess? Some plans are grand only in their futility. You remember the day an advisor proposed tunneling under the walls, an ambitious scheme until the diggers struck water and flooded their own trench, or the time someone insisted on a feigned retreat, only for the men to retreat too well and vanish into the night, reappearing sheepishly 2 days later with tales of lost boots and found wine. Still, every failure is recast as a lesson, every disaster repainted as a calculated risk. The advisors meet in hushed clusters, rewriting history with every telling. The junior officers watch all this with wide eyes, taking notes and dreaming of the day when they too can draw a line on a map and call it victory. The common soldiers, of course, are mostly ignored in these deliberations. You overhear plans discussed in passing, hear the rumors as they ripple through the ranks. The news changes with each retelling. By the time it reaches you, it is less a plan and more a piece of folklore. We are attacking tonight. No, we wait another week. The king's messenger has arrived, and everything is changing. No one knows what is true. No one really cares. You dig, you drill, you wait for orders that will change again by morning. In the Assyrian army, grand plans are like the weather, discussed endlessly, obeyed rarely, blamed for everything. The only certainty is that someone else, somewhere else, is making decisions that will affect your fate. You watch the advisors argue, posture, and pretend. You wish, not for the first time, that someone would simply ask the mud-stained men who have to climb the ladders what they think. As the day ends and the command tent empties, you return to your corner of the camp. Another plan will be hatched tomorrow. Another argument will erupt. Another grand scheme will join the pile of failed ambitions. You fall asleep, wondering if, somewhere in the city, the enemy has advisors just as clever, just as lost, just as eager to prove their worth with someone else's blood. The stories of war are told in numbers. How many soldiers marched, how many enemies fell, how many cities burned. But in the Assyrian camp, there are losses no one bothers to count, and it is these that fill your days and nights, haunting the spaces between the grand plans and the official reports. You notice first the empty spaces at roll call. A man who slept beside you for weeks is gone one morning, his place filled by silence and a pair of boots no one wants to claim. No announcement is made. No questions are asked. Sometimes there is a rumor. He was sent on a mission. He fell ill. He deserted. But the truth rarely matters. The line moves forward. The names are called. and the gap closes as if he was never there at all. Other losses are quieter still. A favorite knife disappears from your belt, never to return. The copper bowl you traded half your rations for vanishes after a hurried meal. A friend's laughter, once as common as bird song, fades away, replaced by the dull drone of fatigue. These losses pile up, one on top of another, until you stop noticing them. What you had yesterday is never guaranteed tomorrow. Some losses are taken by the mud that claims sandals, that swallows the wheels of supply carts, that sucks at the legs of men until they vanish beneath the weight of exhaustion. You watch as soldiers dig trenches in the rain, each swing of the shovel erasing the work of the day before. You hear stories of men lost to fever, to infection, to the slow suffocation of waterlogged lungs. The healers do their best, but there are too many wounds and too few hands. The dying are moved to the edges of the camp, their groans muffled by the sound of rain on canvas. Animals disappear too. A mule wanders off in the night. A goat vanishes from its pen. A dog goes missing, only to be found days later in someone's stew. You learn not to ask questions. Even the camp's cats grow wary, keeping to the shadows, as if they know the price of being noticed in a place where hunger is the only constant. There are other kinds of losses, harder to describe. A man wakes one morning unable to speak, his eyes empty, his hands trembling. Another cannot sleep, pacing the camp in endless circles, haunted by dreams he refuses to share. A boy who once sang as he worked now moves in silence, his songs lost to the hunger and fear that gnaw at him from within. No one counts these losses, though everyone feels their weight. Sometimes the losses are not people or things, but pieces of yourself. The patience you once had, the hope you carried from home, the memories of laughter and warmth. Each one erodes a little more with every day of siege. You begin to forget what it was like to feel clean, to be full, to sleep without waking at every sound. You become harder, quieter, your world shrinking to the circle of firelight at night, the heavy certainty of your gear, the taste of bitter bread in your mouth. When death does come, it is rarely dramatic. There is no epic duel, no final speech. A man collapses during drill, a fever burns through a tent, an arrow finds its mark in the chaos of a skirmish. The dead are buried quickly, without ceremony. The earth closes over them, the camp moves on, and only the sharp-eyed notice the fresh mounds of dirt at the camp's edge. You sometimes wonder who will remember these losses. Not the officers who measure success in walls breached and gates opened. Not the scribes who count only the living and the dead in their neat columns. Perhaps you think only those who endure remember, the ones who mark the passing of each friend, each hope, each comfort, as another thread cut from the fabric of their lives. And so, the uncounted losses pile up, invisible but ever present. You feel them in the heaviness of your limbs, the hollowness of your gaze, the tightening silence around every campfire. The city's walls remain standing, but inside the camp, it is as if you are all being chipped away, stone by stone, by a siege no one has named. At night, you count what is left, your gear, your strength, the names you still remember. Each day brings another subtraction, another absence, another silence. In the end, you suspect it is not the walls that will break first, but the people waiting outside them, each loss adding up quietly until there is nothing left to count. It is late, deeper into the night than you care to know. The camp is almost quiet. Fires smolder, half burnt. The watch rotates with dull regularity. The rain has finally stopped, leaving the air heavy, thick with the scent of wet canvas and unwashed bodies. For a moment, it seems as if even the war itself has grown tired and fallen asleep. You are lying in your tent, wrestling with a thin blanket and your own thoughts when it begins. The alarm comes not as a trumpet or a drum, but as a voice, a shout, cracking with fear, somewhere near the camp's edge. The sound rolls over the tents, waking the men as surely as if a torch had set the whole camp alight. Within seconds, the shouts multiply. They're coming! The enemy! Up! Up! You are on your feet before you realize you have moved, clutching for your spear, stumbling over boots and bedrolls in the darkness. The camp erupts into chaos, the slow burn of boredom instantly replaced by the cold burn of terror. Soldiers burst from tents, half dressed and wild eyed. Some run toward the shouting, others run away from it. Someone knocks over a cookpot, sending a splash of oily water into the mud. Orders are shouted and immediately contradicted by louder orders. The officers, those who can be found, shout for calm, but their words vanish in the stampede. You can feel it, a panic with no source, only momentum. The night magnifies everything. Every sound is an enemy, every shadow a threat. A horse breaks free from its rope, galloping through the chaos, scattering men like dice. You see someone swing a sword at nothing, his face white in the moonlight. There are collisions, curses, desperate attempts to assemble in formation. No one knows what is happening. Some say the city's defenders have launched a night attack. Others insist there are spies in the camp, that traitors have opened the gates. Someone claims to have seen fire arrows, though the only thing burning is a toppled torch. You watch as an officer is knocked down by his own men, his command trampled into the mud by 100 pairs of boots. Amid the confusion, there are casualties, real ones. A man stumbles into a pit and breaks his leg. Another is struck by a stray club in the confusion. Somewhere, two men fight over the same shield, neither willing to let go even as the enemy they are bracing for fails to materialize. You duck a swinging elbow, sidestep a pair of frantic mules, and try to make sense of the swirl around you. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the panic begins to burn itself out. The shouts grow fewer, the movements slow. Someone, with the voice of authority and the exhaustion of one who has seen this before, manages to get a line of torches lit. Light, flickering and uncertain, reveals the truth. There is no attack. No one has breached the lines. The only enemies are fear, darkness, and the relentless exhaustion of waiting. Officers stomp from group to group, demanding explanations, barking out names, threatening punishments for imagined cowardice. The men shuffle back to their tents, shamefaced or sullen, muttering curses at the fool who sounded the alarm. A few are missing, hurt, lost, or simply hiding until the mood shifts. The wounded are gathered, bandaged in silence, their injuries reminders of how easily chaos can replace order, even without an enemy in sight. In the aftermath, there is bitterness, a feeling sharper, somehow, than the fear itself. You hear it in the whispered accusations, the muttered doubts. Someone starts a story about a saboteur, an infiltrator, a ghost in the camp. By morning, the story will have grown. The enemy almost broke through. The walls almost fell. Disaster was a hair's breadth away. You know the truth, but it does not matter. Panic writes its own history. The officers will spend the day investigating. There will be new rules, new passwords, a reshuffling of watches. Some men will be punished, not for what they did, but for being noticed in the wrong moment. The rest will try to forget, though the memory will cling like the mud, every shadow now holding the threat of a new alarm. You crawl back into your tent, heart still racing, sleep more distant than ever. You lie awake, listening to the uneasy silence, the low voices that never quite fade. You wonder if the city's defenders heard the chaos, if they laughed, or if they too spent the night staring into darkness, waiting for ghosts. In the end, nothing has changed. The siege goes on, the walls still stand, and the real enemy, fear, remains undefeated, lurking in every shadow, waiting for another night to strike. Morning comes with a chill so sharp it feels personal. There is a different mood in the camp, an electricity running through the fog and mud. You do not need an officer's speech to know what it means. The final assault is coming. The endless days of waiting, the false alarms, the slow rot of rain and boredom, all have been leading here to the promise of a decision and the threat of an ending. The officers move with a purpose you have not seen in weeks. There are meetings at every corner, maps spread over barrels, whispered arguments cut short by the arrival of someone higher up the ladder. The plans, so often shifting and confused, have settled into a single brutal clarity. Tomorrow, or perhaps the day after, you will attack. The camp is a hive of activity. Blacksmiths work through the night, sharpening swords and patching battered armor. The engineers put the finishing touches on the siege towers, repairing broken wheels and lashing the last hides to their sides. The rams are tested, their bronze heads gleaming with fresh oil. You hear the steady drone of carpenters, the rhythmic shouts of officers drilling men by torchlight. No one complains now, not out loud. There is only the work and the knowledge that soon the waiting will end. The priests are busiest of all. They march through the camp in solemn processions, burning incense, smearing ash on foreheads, and chanting prayers for victory. You see them at every crossroads, every tent, offering blessings or omens. You take the mark, as everyone does, half believing, half hoping. The gods, after all, might be watching, and there are no atheists before a city wall. Tonight, the food is a little better, the wine distributed a little more freely. Officers offer speeches, short, grim, honest for once. Do your duty, watch your comrades back. The city is waiting. There is no talk of glory, only of necessity. Men eat in silence or whisper in small groups, checking gear, testing bowstrings, making quiet promises to themselves and each other. You gather with your closest companions, the ones who have made it this far. There is little left to say, so you share memories, stories of home, laughter forced and raw, a joke about the cook's soup that almost passes for genuine humor. Someone produces a scrap of cloth, blue for luck, and everyone touches it before it is tucked away again. You notice how even the bravest hands tremble. The night before battle is like no other. The camp is quiet, the noise stifled by anticipation. The usual squabbles, the dice games, the bitter arguments about rations have all faded away. Men write letters they know will never be sent, carve names into shield backs, murmur prayers to old gods and new. Every man is alone, even in the crowded tent. Sleep is a stranger, hovering just out of reach. You lie awake, listening to the slow, restless breathing all around, the occasional cough, the scrape of a blade being sharpened in the dark. You review your equipment again and again: spearhead, shield strap, the knots on your sandals. You know it will make no difference tomorrow, that chaos and chance care little for preparation. But you do it anyway, clinging to the illusion of control. You count your arrows, inspect the edge of your dagger, practice the grip of your sword until your hands ache. It is not readiness, not really, but it is what you have. The city is silent. Even the defenders seem to know what is coming. You think of them behind those thick, battered walls, wondering if they are making the same preparations, whispering the same hopes, feeling the same fear. There is no hatred left, only the exhausted respect of one survivor for another. As the first light seeps into the sky, the camp stirs. The priests begin their chants anew. Officers move through the ranks, offering final instructions, final threats. You see the siege towers lined up in the mist, monstrous shapes waiting for the signal. The battering rams are rolled into place, ropes tightened, wheels checked one last time. The ladders are stacked and counted, each one a promise and a threat. You take your place in the formation, surrounded by faces you know too well, and some you have never seen before. The ground beneath your feet is hard, unyielding. You grip your weapon, feel your heart pounding, try to remember every lesson, every mistake, every scrap of advice you have ever been given. The waiting is over. The city stands before you, stubborn and silent. The Assyrian army is ready, or as ready as anyone ever is, for what comes next. The signal will come soon. You draw a breath, slow and shaky, and wonder if you will see another dawn. Dawn breaks without ceremony. There is no blood red sky, no dramatic thunder, just the slow arrival of pale, indifferent sunlight creeping over the silent camp and the city that still stands. This is the last day before the storm, and everyone knows it, though few speak the words aloud. The air is taut, every movement deliberate, every sound unnaturally loud. For once, even the crows keep their distance. You wake as if from the shallowest sleep, more tired than when you closed your eyes. The camp is already moving, but without the usual bluster. Men walk in pairs, heads bowed, tending to final repairs on battered armor and battered nerves. Some spend the morning staring at the city's walls as if willing them to collapse on their own. Others sit alone, faces drawn, lips moving in silent bargains with whatever gods might still be listening. The usual squabbles are gone. There is no room left for pettiness. A few men write letters, real or imagined, scratching lines into scraps of parchment, leather, or even bare earth. They tell of love, of regret, of debts unpaid. Some letters are quietly burned, others tucked away inside armor, heavy as iron. You think of what you might write if you believed in the safety of tomorrow. Instead, you count your supplies, polish your blade, tie your sandals again and again, fingers numb from repetition. The officers pace the camp, softer now, more careful with their orders. Their bravado has worn thin. You see it in the way they adjust their belts, the way they glance over their shoulders. Each gives a different kind of speech. One is all fire and vengeance. We will show them what it means to defy Assyria. Another speaks only of duty. Stay close. Remember your training. Trust your brothers. You find yourself preferring the quiet ones, the honest ones, the ones who do not pretend that survival is guaranteed. The priests are everywhere, faces smeared with ash, voices hoarse from endless prayers. They sprinkle water, burn incense, promise that the gods will watch over you. You wonder if the gods are listening, or if they too have turned their faces from the camp. It does not matter. By this point, even the least superstitious among you accept the rituals, if only to have something to do with their hands. Food is served early: bread, olives, a thin broth. No one lingers at the cookpot. No one complains about the taste. Every bite is chewed with the seriousness of a last meal. Some share what little they have saved: a hidden fig, a sliver of dried meat, a memory of better days. Around the camp, the conversations are short and soft. Men make promises they know they cannot keep. I will see you after. Save me a place by the fire. If you find my brother, tell him. You add your own to the pile, because hope, like hunger, does not disappear even when you know it should. The siege engines stand ready, glistening with dew and anxiety. The towers loom like silent judges, the rams squat and patient. You watch as the engineers give last minute instructions, as if the fate of the machines and the men inside them can be changed by a few extra turns of rope, a fresh coat of oil. There is comfort in the rituals of preparation, even as you know they are mostly for show. The city's walls seem higher, the defenders invisible behind their stones. Somewhere inside, you imagine, the same rituals are unfolding, armor checked, weapons sharpened, silent prayers spoken. You wonder who they are, your enemy, and if, by some miracle, you might both survive long enough to meet without swords in hand. By midday, the sun has burned through the mist. The order is given: rest, hydrate, wait for the signal. You lie in the shade of your shield, eyes half closed, listening to the murmurs of the camp, the quiet jokes, the trembling laughter, the sudden silence when a name is spoken. Every sound is sharper, every moment more real, as if the world itself is holding its breath. You stand with your cohort, ready or not. The officers gather for one last meeting. The priests offer a final blessing. The city's gates remain shut, silent and watchful. All that is left is the waiting, the long, slow slide toward the moment when orders become action and the future becomes history. You take a breath and let it out slowly. The last day before the storm is nearly over. Tomorrow, the city may fall, or you may fall, or both. But for now, you are here, alive in the thin sunlight, surrounded by men who have shared your fears, your food, your jokes, and your silence. In the end, there is nothing left to do but wait. The walls are still standing. The army is still standing. You are still standing. The storm will come soon enough.